Our next and final panel for the day is about scale-ups in Europe. Show of hands, who here has ever scaled up a startup? Couple of you, yeah, okay. I'm gonna say that's like 10 or 15 hands. How was it? Was it easy? Shout it out at me. Was it easy to scale your startup? No, right? It was hard. Okay, well, here to tell us a little bit more about that, going from garage to global building tech champions in Europe, please give a warm hug welcome to our panel and welcome back the head of startups at Bitkom, Daniel, and his panel.
When the first garages were built over 100 years ago, probably no one thought that these small spaces would become a symbol of innovation, startup, scale-up, and technology. Today, we are far more professional in the startup and scale-up ecosystem, and ideas no longer need to be tinkered with between oil cans and garden tools. At the core, however, we are still at the same challenge. How do we manage to bring innovation and technology from small to large? How do we manage to scale young companies from garage to global? And what does it take to build a tech champion in Europe? I'm looking forward to our next panel and to discuss this and get further insights. I'm happy to welcome Jörg Gerbig. Jörg is COO and member of the management board of JustEatTakeaway.com. Back in 2009, Jörg founded Lieferando.de and joined Takeaway.com following the acquisition of Lieferando in 2014. Jörg graduated in finance and management and also gained experience in M&A and equity capital markets. Happy to have you here, Jörg.
Thank you.
Also, welcome to Jessica Holzbach. She's the founder of Pile Capital, the first treasury management provider for startups. Previously, she was one of the founders of Penta, a digital SME bank. And with a degree in management, she already founded the companies before and spent a large part of her career as a management consultant. Happy to have you here, Jessica.
Thank you.
And also welcome to Max Tayenthal. Together with Valentin Stahl, he founded the unicorn N26 around 10 years ago. Max was also CFO before taking on the co-CEO role. Previously, he worked in a variety of consulting and financial roles at professional services firms. And Max holds a couple of degrees, bachelor's and master's degrees in economics and business administration, as well as a law degree. Happy to have you here, guys. Today, I would like to discuss with you what it takes to enter a market as a disruptor, what challenges and opportunities await innovative players in the current economic situation, and what framework conditions we find here in Europe and in Germany for scale-ups to grow and how to build pan-European champions. So, in general, we see that the digital sector remains a driving force of the European economy and is relatively, compared to other sectors, resilient to the face of crisis, in the face of crisis. Startups and scale-ups, they make an important contribution to this strong and further growth. But we see that German companies are increasingly concerned about losing in a global competition. So in order to maintain this international competitiveness, we as an economy need to be more innovative. Before we look into the future, I want to take a look in the past. Jörg, when you founded, not like you're the oldest, but when you founded Lieferando in 2009, couriers were not really common in the cityscapes. So what challenges did you face when you entered the market?
Yeah, basically when we founded the business back in 2009, it was basically the back end of the financial crisis. So financing was pretty rare. It's probably comparable to the situation you have right now, because no one wanted to invest in any sort of risky business. And so it was very hard for us to actually get some financing. Actually, our first financing round was 220,000 euros, which for nowadays standard is basically nothing. So we were basically hardly paying us a salary, and we had to be living with these constrained resources we had. So we had to do basically everything ourselves. We had to go out and do sales ourselves. We had to, up to midnight, basically do customer service ourselves. So if you were complaining about not getting a pizza, you were ending up with one of the founders in the hotline and were complaining with one of the founders that the pizza didn't arrive. So I think that was super tough time, but at the same time, it was also part of our success story because we knew the business inside out right from the beginning, and we were trying to be mindful of the limited resources we had. And I think it actually strengthened us a lot to start at a challenging time, which we have right now as well with limited resources. So that was the start, and then obviously we scaled up over time, creating network effects. And with the scale, these network effects get stronger and stronger, and you're building a really sustainable, big-scale business.
But like when you say like, okay, you started also working on the hotline, for example, how was it like, especially regarding the customers? Like, was it also hard for them to have this mentality shift because now they started to order pizza online instead of just ringing the restaurant?
Yeah, we had a bit of a chicken and egg problem because you're building that marketplace with network effects. And you had to start first with a restaurant. So we were acquiring these restaurants, and these restaurants were attracting customers. But at the beginning, we were always saying, like, why are we only growing 30%, not 200 or 300? Well, at the same time, Groupon was probably founded roughly about the same time, and we saw them from one to the other year skyrocketing, and we thought, why can't we be so fast growing? But later I realized, actually, it takes time to build a sustainable business. Rome wasn't built in a day, and a good startup also not. So the challenge is really like getting that chicken and egg problem under control and starting with the restaurant, then getting the consumer, and the consumers are attracting again new restaurants. And it just takes time. We always say it's a marathon and not a sprint. And this marathon is still ongoing until today.
Cool. Max, things are a bit different for you because like you didn't enter a totally new market, but with N26, when you founded, you entered an established environment as a young player where trust, especially in financial sector, plays a huge role. How did you manage to take a stand here?
Actually, the business is quite different to food delivery, but I have to say, like some of the challenges that Jörg described sound very familiar. Like when we founded N26 in 2013, it was before the fintech wave. You know, a couple of years later, everyone wanted to invest in fintech. Like at that point in time, there was only like few specialists. This was before people really understood that there's like this an entire industry to be disrupted. So it was incredibly difficult to get first funding. And in startup, especially back in the days, as Jörg described it, much smaller funding rounds. And with fintech, it's different to some of the other industries. You know, if a couple of people, if we, the four of us, have a good idea in e-commerce, everyone puts €1,000 on the table, and we launch something in 4 weeks from now. Again, scaling that is still quite difficult. If you think about the great e-commerce companies, think about Zalando, 10,000 of people working in warehouses, packaging shoes and other goods, like lots of working capital. Fintech is very different. You have to set up a lot of things first. You have to get a license in our case, reporting to the regulator, build the compliance piece, build AML and all the many other aspects. But if you build the systems right, and by the way, that's an opportunity and differentiates us like from other banks. If you build the systems right, then it doesn't matter if you sign up 50 customers tomorrow or 50,000 customers. Now, when it comes to trust, it is true. Trust is very important for banking, but the way you're building trust is different to the past. So I think 20, 30 years ago, it would have been very difficult with very limited resources to disrupt an industry, to get like a certain market position in that industry. And I think that's also the reason why fintech or banking is one of the areas that yet has to be disrupted. Like think about all the other industries. Think about travel. You know, us from booking all our travels in a travel agency to us booking everything online, it was a matter of 5 years. And it happened 20 years ago. Us buying our records in the record store, to us streaming everything online, to us consuming, like downloading everything online, was a matter of 5 years. Like think about aspects of transportation, think about like movies, all these things like happened a long time ago, and it was relatively quick. Now for a couple of reasons, also I think the massive investment necessary, and perhaps also like the importance to build up a brand and trust, that takes longer. What was very positive for us and what made it possible, you know, if you think about some traditional banks, and there might be some traditional bankers here, like in the past you were building up, you had like this 2-page like advertisement, like some branding, I don't know, whatever, consistency with building trust, all these kind of things. Like for us, it is much more important that our users endorse us. We are very close to our users, and we know that the majority of the users are coming to N26 because they have been exposed to the product by their friends. And so like for us, it's much more important that someone is like talking about the product, someone is like using social media, talking about our product, is endorsing the product when being asked. And that's, again, more important to build up trust than building like major expensive branding campaigns.
So you said building trust, building a brand, and we still need to disrupt fintech sector. To stick with that, Jessica, with Pile Capital, you're just about to launch your next startup. Many startups have ignored the issue of treasury management before. Now, Silicon Valley Bank bankruptcy, it came to the mind as well. You already founded a startup. Jörg spoke about networking effects. So what would you say? Like, do zeitgeist, like timing, but also like the network you already built in the fintech sector help you to establish a brand?
Yeah, I would say definitely. So building a company is always about the people, it's about capital, we spoke, but it's also about timing. So there can be this time that you're a bit too early for some brilliant ideas and it never works. And if you're too late, then maybe some competitors are already at it. So timing is important, and events like Silicon Valley Bank just kind of amplify or give us as a company tailwind. But I think when I looked at it, it's more like a development or like a general change in the way we do business. Because in the past, for example, treasury management was only for companies that have international exposure, that have multiple banks to manage, and that have multiple entities. And in the past, this was just like huge companies or enterprises. And nowadays, I mean, our world is getting so much more complex that almost every startup from day one has international exposure. You have maybe talents from the US, maybe you have a vendor in the US, maybe you have talents in Eastern Europe, and you have different currencies to handle. So with this increase of complexity, there's also the need of a new solution. And finding these changes or like these market trends and changes with the right timing is like always a good starting point. And I want to add one more topic to the founding and like how much capital you actually have. With my very first company, I only had 20K, so that's even less. And with Penta, we started with 50K. And I think sometimes having like limited resources forces you actually to do all the jobs yourself. And it forces you to be very conscious of what you want to do and where you should focus on. And I think it was one of the problems of, for example, last year, when a lot of companies that do it for the very first time get maybe 5 million on a pitch deck. And then you have so much money that you buy in all the talent and all the resources to be very fast, but you actually don't know what you want to do, and you lose focus, and then sometimes this has even negative effects.
Yeah, you already said it, like, market is changing now, and obviously in order to grow, there must be a market. So we saw, especially last year and also this year, VC funding is going down. We have a recession in view of inflation, at rising interest rates. Max, do you see economic stagnation as more of a challenge or an opportunity for young players?
Yeah, let me decompose this question. I think there's two areas to look at. One is the fundraising environment, which is probably what everyone described very like different, much more challenging than it used to be. And the other one is the general economy. What does it mean for the market? You know, recession fears of people, high inflation, and these kind of indicators. Let me start with the first piece. Like when I'm doing this for 10 years, and I've seen like many cycles. As I described, when we started in 26, there was very little like money in the markets. Like we had to manage super tight. It was incredibly hard to raise capital. Then markets got like much more focused on growth. I recall the time, you know, barely looking at the burn of the company. Everything was about like top line, customer growth. It was going down until unit economics, because that is the area that scales. People cared less about like what you're paying for the office, what you're paying for the team. Then like investors lost significant amounts of money with some companies that successfully scaled negative unit economics, like Uber, Lyft, and WeWork. And then suddenly everything was like really tight. Then came the craziness of the years before end of 2021. And then I think right now it is super tight. Everything is about cost containment, and we will see until when like markets are coming back. And I'm personally invested in close to 50 startup companies, and it's great companies. And I see a lot of these companies struggling because, as I described before, fintech is just a major investment at the beginning. And if I think about N26, like 5 years after launch or 3 years after launch, if like someone would have told us, there's no new capital and you have to get the company profitable like in the next 9 months, it would have been something that is incredibly difficult. Like I did like 11 funding rounds to date, including all the internal extensions. Sometimes you get the timing right. Sometimes it's more difficult. Like we closed our 900 million Series E funding round the 26th of November, 2021. And the markets were peaking the 30th of November. So we rarely got it as right. But again, we will see until the markets are coming back. It is obviously a challenging market to raise capital, especially I think in the fintech area, but probably in other growth areas like loss-making companies. I think are very hard to pitch. And again, IPO timing might also take longer. Now the second part of the question is like how is the economy like for the startups? I think it is more difficult for certain industries. Like if you think about SaaS businesses, N26 as well, turning every euro a couple of times. Like we cancelled our Slack membership because we are paying for the G Suite anyways. I think fashion is definitely a challenging vertical for companies like N26 that have their own balance sheet. The current rising interest rates is something that is extremely beneficial for our company.
Jörg, looking at your vertical, you're already an established player right now, and the market is basically consolidating right now. So how do you look at it right now, especially in these circumstances we're having?
Yeah, I think it's actually to some extent healthy. I mean, the market was just having too much cash and too much money was flowing into the market, and you basically could see like a lot of business models which were not sustainable were funded, which were actually hurting also business models which probably were sustainable. And so I think it's actually a healthy development. And I never thought I'm going to quote Arnold Schwarzenegger, but actually he once said that strength doesn't come from winning, it actually comes from struggles. And I can tell you that we had a lot of struggles in our history, and that actually always made us stronger because you became leaner or better at what you're doing and learning out of the difficult times you had. Now, in terms of going forward, obviously, with money not being available, unlimited, so you have actually a lot of companies who need to consolidate to further actually survive. And that provides a lot of opportunities, and we're in a lucky position that we're well equipped with capital, because capital is an issue at the moment, but we have 2 billion of cash on the balance sheet, so like actually we are well equipped. So for us, it's actually a good opportunity going forward in this market environment.
Looking at a smaller company now, Jessica, you just founded. How can new business models adapt in times of recession? Is there a strategy which helps you? Is it like you just sit in a room together with the leading team and you discuss, okay, what should we do now? Or how does that work?
I mean, first of all, it's quite a shift going from, when I left Penta, I was like just post Series B. So then going back to founding a company again, you really have to unlearn everything you learned before and really start from scratch again and picking up the phone and calling the customers and understanding what's going on. And I think that's exactly what we do every day. So the team is like in a size that everyone is in the same room. We sit there every day, we think what's the most important thing to do today, this week, and maybe this month. But like that much further, there's no planning, right? There's like a vision, there's like a goal you want to have, and there are certain milestones what you want to achieve. But there's absolutely no sense in this early stage to plan longer than that, because you have to adapt to market circumstances, you have to adapt to customer feedback, you have to speak to a lot of customers every day, and maybe after the fifth, you get an epiphany that you have to go a little bit more left than right. So it is, I would say, early days are tough, they're exciting, and there's a lot of change every day.
But I like the idea. Let's stick to the vision now, because we want to speak about like how to build European tech champions. And obviously, like the German market size is limited, so the step abroad is just like a question of time. But to go abroad, you need the right framework conditions. Jörg, you operate in different EU countries. You're dealing with different regulatory frameworks, cultural differences as well. What measures would help to simplify expansion?
I mean, for us, like you said, we're in multiple countries, and we can experience that, for example, in Germany, we feel like we're trying more to manage the status quo than rather to adapt to new circumstances which you find. I mean, one example, which we see sometimes as Betriebsverfassungsgesetz, is from 1972. That's actually a time when the scientific calculator was invented. Basically, since that time, a lot of things have changed. And I don't want to state that we need to take away protection for employees. I don't mean that. But we need to adapt things to new circumstances. For example, in this case. No? And that is often not done because we're more trying to preserve a status quo rather to think about what can we do to make things better. We are asking our business all the time, how would I set up the business today if I had to set it up from scratch? Because 5 years ago, we were much smaller. The circumstances were completely different. So I asked myself, is that still the right setup we're acting with? And I think the government should ask themselves the same question, how would I set up the pension system if it was basically to be set up from scratch again today? How would I set up education if education had to be set up under the current circumstances? How I had to set up the health system? And people either don't ask themselves the question or don't dare to put that in motion because they don't have that long-term view and vision where they want to go towards. And they're just trying to preserve the status quo or amending things to the status quo. And I think that has to change.
So being founder means also adapting to new circumstances basically every day, every week.
All the time. I mean, you were saying it. I mean, at the beginning, you're basically at the edge of bankruptcy every day. So there's no need to plan for the next 2 years or 3 years. You need to have a vision where you want to go towards, but it's no need to plan for that because every day things change. Like now, obviously, we have a 3-year plan, we have a 5-year plan, but even when we started, we actually set it up more as a B2B business. We wanted to have companies make their employees order, and then at the end of the month, they get a joint billing, so they don't have all the admin hassle. Then we shifted towards the consumer side. Then we had a marketplace business purely. Then the apps came up with the iPhone, so that was a new change. So we had to come up with the apps. Then all of a sudden, logistics became larger topic, and we had to set up a logistical business around the marketplace business. Now we have to go into new verticals like groceries and all these things. If you would stick around with the same structure like 10 years ago, we wouldn't be there anymore. And that actually needs to be the case for a company, but I would love to see that more in politics as well.
Yeah. So, but looking especially political-wise, we have some external factors which influence the business. For example, we already spoke about it, we have challenges to access capital in VC, but also in the general capital market. We have issues with talent acquisition. We don't have enough talents in Germany. We have difficulties with market expansions as well. So, Max, how would you say, what should change for European scale-ups to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, first, I think you're naming the right challenges. One is access to capital, extremely important to scale a business. The second one is access to talent. The third one I would like to add is kind of the regulatory environment. If we think about new key technologies, like artificial intelligence, we need to acknowledge that from out of the 10 top companies in the world, there's 0 based in Europe. So, if you look at the US, a big part of the increase in GDP of the last 20 years is coming from new technologies. It's coming from startups. And I think Europe is underproportionally benefiting from that. So if you look at capital, like N26 ourselves, the last round that was led by European players was the seed round. Afterwards, our cap table is a reflection of where the worldwide venture capital is located. So it's either US investors or Chinese investors with a little bit of Israeli money also in there. So, but I have to say, it has also changed. In the last year, in Berlin alone, at least in the earlier stages, a lot of new funds have developed. Talent, I think education is very important. I think, last time I looked, of the last 20 developers we hired, 18 were in pending visa status. So, we're hiring not in Germany, not in Europe, but even we're hiring globally, and otherwise it is impossible to fill a position. That's, by the way, it is an advantage that Europe has versus the US. We had operations also in the US. In the US, it is extremely difficult to bring talent from other markets. We had problems to bring, despite investing significant amounts of money, we had problems to bring our own people there. Regulation is definitely an important one. You know, think about autonomous driving, I don't know, cryptocurrencies and so on. I think in the EU, there's a higher level of skepticism than in other parts of the world.
Jessica, you just found it again. So you're quite experienced with the process overall, but did you still had some regulatory hurdles you had to take, and do you see the same issues compared to N26, which is obviously quite way bigger than Pile Capital is at the moment?
I mean, absolutely. I think especially when you start for the first time, I think you spend a lot of money on lawyers. I think lawyers and tax accountants are probably also the ones benefiting a lot from venture capital. But in general, for us, also building again in the finance industry, we had to really make sure that our business model, like how we build it, is this already a regulatory business? Do we need a license for doing that? Do we need a license for doing that? And especially when you build a new business model or something completely new that hasn't been there, you always have to get legal opinions for everything. And I think that's something that is very expensive. It makes you slow down, and it comes due to the fact that there's not that much support on the regulatory side to help you figure these things out. So I would wish actually that we get a bit more support, a bit more clarity there, and help reduce the hurdle for new companies to start.
So you need more support to grow in general, but it's not only about growing, because drawing the bigger picture, we want to keep the value creation in Germany as well. Jessica, I don't want to ask you, would you found again in Germany, because obviously you just did, but how would you rate the framework conditions for growth in Germany?
I mean, I thought quite long about it, and I think the only reason I did it now was because I knew exactly how the process works, and it was easy. But there's a lot of reasons that actually speak again founding in Germany. And one example is that, for example, one of my co-founders was not a resident in Germany, and she was very afraid to actually accept the shares and start a company because she heard about all the problems of exit taxation if it ever comes to that, right? So there are a lot of things that make the process difficult, that make it scary, that make it, not really attractive. And I think this initial process has to be improved. The same for venture capital. I think every investor that invests into a German company and has to sit at a notary meeting for almost 20 hours to read a shareholder agreement out loud is absolutely shocked. This is nowhere else the case, and it makes the process here very, very difficult. So I think there's a lot of small things that you could digitize, that could improve, and I think we also have to, because, and maybe some of the people don't know, my last company, Penta, was afterwards acquired by a French competitor. So I think we don't even have to look across the pond to the US or to Asia, but there are already countries in Europe that do this much better. And we have to actually make sure that if we build a company here, it should not only be in kind of fostering the seed stage, but we actually should want companies to go IPO in Germany and not somewhere else. So thinking from the beginning to the end, and have a vision also as the government.
You just dropped the 3 letters, IPO. Max, you already said a bit earlier, the conditions for IPOs right now. What's your opinion on the framework conditions in Germany in general, and also IPO conditions in Germany?
I would definitely found N26 in Berlin again, or to be very precise, we founded the company in Austria, in Vienna, out of our living rooms. And then for 1 month, we were thinking about, should we go to London or should we go to Berlin? Berlin was not so obvious. It was long before Brexit. Berlin was not so obvious of a choice because on the fintech side, you had much more happening, in the UK, many more companies and also more capital available. We actually choose Berlin for 2 reasons. One, I think higher living quality. I think it's an amazing city, and you pay people, say, 30% less than in London, but everyone is happy because they can go to the restaurants they want to, they can rent an apartment next to the office, they can go to the bars they want to. I think it's a very different lifestyle. And the other thing, back then, prices were significantly lower in Berlin. And if you're raising €1 million, you could just go much further. I think with Brexit, but also before that, Berlin definitely got stronger in that. I'm not talking about Germany specifically. I think Berlin is an amazing market. We have 1,500 people on the team, not even 10% German, not even 3% from Berlin, but we have, I think, 85 or 90 different nationalities in the meantime. And it's a little bit like investment banking. If you want to to investment banking, you won't end up in Munich or in Innsbruck, but like it's very concentrated in a couple of cities. And what speaks for Berlin, Berlin is so much hyped as one of the European startup capitals that you have exactly the people with the right mindset. It's not that the people born in Berlin, they're like, naturally the best people to work in a startup. But like, as I said, it's about the people that want to move into the city. And you have so much talent coming to Berlin that have exactly that mindset and want to work in a startup here, that I think it is a very interesting city, and I very much love living here. Now, we have a European company, we have a European business. So again, for me, the city of choice would be Berlin. If you think about building a global business, and if you look at all the circumstances, everything from access to talent, capital, the size of the home market, and so on, you might end up in a different country.
Okay. Jörg, Max just spoke about like the attractiveness of Berlin for especially talents to go here. You spoke earlier about laws made in the 70s and might be not suitable for a digital time. So would you consider Germany as innovation friendly?
Yeah, I think the good thing is like you have a strong foundation with a legal system and things that work pretty well. But overall, I think a lot of things are not adapted to nowadays world. And as I mentioned, I think we should embrace change and try to see that as an opportunity rather than be afraid of change. And I often see that. And that's why also, for example, attracting talent is so difficult. If you look, for example, right now in Europe, I see most founders probably going to Portugal, for example, because they're incentivized. They really are fighting for young people to found their business there. They're partly tax exempt, and they provide other opportunities there. And then all of a sudden, you create a network of people who are founding and help themselves. And you had to some extent that network also in Berlin, and you still have that. But like, I think there's not a lot of incentives really like for young people to move here, other than Berlin is probably a hip city and people want to move here because it's nice and you can have a good party. But other than that, I think we should create incentives to move to Berlin or other cities in Germany beyond that. The other one is obviously the culture. I think Germans are not necessarily known for welcoming everybody, and I think that's something we all can change, welcoming people who are new to the city or new to the country. I think that's also a very, very important topic. And the third one is the whole topic about infrastructure and the educational system, for example. If you're a young professional moving with your family, it's very hard to find a place in a kindergarten. It's all these little things which I think sometimes make it quite difficult to attract talent and make people move here. But obviously there's also, we talk a lot about things to be improved, but there's also like quite some good things talking about security and like stability of the system, and these sort of things actually provide good opportunities to plan. Because we're not in a country like in South America where you have inflation rates of double-digit percentages and stuff like that. So like there's good and bad sides, but there's a lot of things to improve and to attract more talent here.
So I understand, like, in generally all of you three, you say like, okay, it's really good here, but there are issues in some way. Support when you found a new company, other European countries which incentivize more, maybe also like the capital market abroad is more attractive. In the next session, sorry to drop the bomb now, Christian Lindner was supposed to come. Unfortunately, he's for a really important appointment in the Chancellery, so he won't be able to join us. But imagine he would come here now. What would be like the one wish you would give to him in order to make Germany and Europe especially a more attractive place for scale-ups to found in Germany, to scale up in Europe, to stay in Europe? Jörg.
Yeah, I think embracing the change, adapting the framework to the new reality in Germany, that's super important because we're living in an interesting world. I mean, 20 years back, countries were not competing for talent because people were not moving around in the world so much. Like you were just going to the company which was next city, basically. If so at all, you went maybe to a city 200 kilometers further in the same country, but you didn't say, like, I'm going to move to London. When I thought about my first job, I was thinking first which country I want to live, and then I was thinking which company is in that country where I want to live. And I think politicians sometimes have to remember that actually also they are in a competitive environment to attract talent, because this talent is paying all of our pensions in the future. And I think we're not yet aware of that situation. And I would really love to be people aware of that situation and see it more in this context.
Okay, so strengthening the business location in a way of making it more attractive for talents as well.
Yeah.
Jessica.
I mentioned France before. They have a program that's called La French Tech, and there they selected the next 40 startups that they believe will be the next globally relevant tech companies. I think something like that I would wish for, like a program in Germany calling like the next 50, selecting maybe the 50 fastest or best growing companies in Germany, and encourage founders to think big and really give them the chance and the hope and the vision to not just build a German champion, a European champion, but actually build a world-class champion, and that like the next big companies come from here.
Okay. So also more public support, make it more visible that startups are really changing with their ideas. Max, what would you wish yourself?
Yeah, whenever I'm being asked, like, what's my wishes for politics, it is not direct interference. It's not like, we don't want to have subsidies. I don't think that the government should invest directly into startups or in funds. I think they should create an environment where companies can thrive. If I could pick out two, I guess, like war on talent is like the most important thing. Making visa easier accessible for companies and for applicants would be extremely important. The ease of discussion is another important one. We are like in an international war on talent. And like for many of the people we want to hire, they have offers from companies in other parts of the world. And the ESOP for companies like ours, like an employee stock option plan, where you give people a long-term incentive, like give them shares in the company, is incredibly important. And that is just more tax beneficial in other countries than it is in Germany. And just if you give someone the same share in a company in the US, and like we would compete with that offer, like the net amount the applicant would receive, even in the case of the same value creation, would just be higher in the US, and that puts Europe, or like Germany, into a natural disadvantage.
Okay, so we see, to just sum it up, we have especially pain points at talent acquisition, visa processes, also ESOP to make it competitive in an international way. We really need to support more the startup ecosystem, scale-up ecosystem in the public as well. And we need to more access to capital as well. So thank you very much for having you here. Time runs fast. It was really a pleasure to speak to you. On the other hand, because I don't want to end it like with bad things we have in Germany, Max, you said it, Berlin is really attractive. We have a lot of good bars here. So that's 1 point for us. So thank you very, very much for having you here. It was a pleasure. Thanks, and a round of applause to Max Tayenthal, co-founder and co-CEO of 26, Jessica Holzbach, co-founder and CEO of Pi Capital, and Jörg Gerbig, CEO and member of the board of management of Just Eat Takeaway and founder of Lieferando. Thank you very much.
Thank you.